and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. So last week, Matt Taibbi released the latest batch of Twitter files. This one was titled The Great COVID-19 Lie Machine, Stanford, the Virality Project, and the Censorship of True Stories. We have been waiting for this drop for a while, and it finally showed up. So we are going to go over it. But before we get into what the files say, we first have to understand what the Virality Project is. Now, the Virality Project is an initiative of Stanford Law School and their School of International Studies. The project is funded by various philanthropic grants who also receive government dollars. And the aim of the project was to understand and figure out how to spot, combat, quote, disinformation, specifically in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. The initiative held weekly briefings and wrote up several policy proposals, including one that ultimately famously came to pass, the creation of a Ministry of Misinformation. Do you remember that? It was officially called the Disinformation Governance Board, and it was created in May of 2022, just 1 year after the Virality Project launched. And they were the ones to come up with the brilliant idea to create this new department saying, quote, because of the dynamic threat that mis and disinformation poses to national security, we recommend the creation of a federal center of excellence for mis and disinformation housed in the Department of Homeland Security's CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So what Matt Taibbi and other actual journalists who worked on uncovering the Twitter files discovered was that this Virality Project set up a so-called partnership with Twitter where they could send the company notifications on what to look for and effectively censor. Here's the email that sort of started this thing off, that kicked it off. Hi, Twitter team. Happy Friday. I wanted to follow up on our conversation at the end of last year when we introduced the work that the Stanford team was starting up on vaccine disinformation response. Since we last spoke, we've begun our new partnership across 3 academic organizations, and they list all those off, and in collaboration with yada, 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 going off all the people that they're working with in this space. They say, now that the partnership is underway, we would love to open up this conversation again to understand how we can best collaborate with the Twitter team in this work. The same JIRA system from the EIP is up and running, and we've improved the notification system to incorporate your feedback from our last chat. We would not have as short of an SLA expectation as the election work. I don't know what all of these acronyms mean, but they go on to say this is certainly a marathon, not a sprint. Our goal would be to have a line of communication with your team by which we can raise vaccine-related disinformation narratives we are noting either on Twitter or across other platforms. So they're saying, you know, we're going to get going on this project. We're going to start flagging misinformation and disinformation, and we're going to collaborate on this. Isn't this great, Twitter team? Now, the first question that should be on everyone's mind is, why would Twitter even accept this partnership? I mean, having a team of people sifting through whatever this project sent them takes money and resources. Another question should be why this Virality Project would go beyond just writing up analysis and sending it to government officials. Why would they be taking the time and the resources to set up these meetings and notification system? I mean, what was the motivation, or who was behind this Virality Project? Here they are saying they're doing it because the government can't. Here's a video of it.
So because of the feedback and the ideas from this group, we were able to pull together pretty quickly a project between these 4 different institutions to try to fill the gap of the things that the government cannot do themselves.
The Twitter files then chronicle the various items of misinformation the project decides to flag. So let's go through some of them. Here's one of the Twitter files, the reports of vaccinated individuals contracting COVID-19 anyway. So they wanted to silence natural immunity, suggesting that COVID-19 or anything that suggested COVID-19 leaked from a lab, or even worrisome jokes, they said, is what they wanted to flag. So that is natural immunity, COVID leaking from a lab, worrisome jokes. They also wanted to limit true content that might promote vaccine hesitancy, including true stories of vaccine side effects and any true post that can fuel hesitancy. You can see it right there. So true content, So true information, they're wanting to censor. They're saying true content. But if it promotes vaccine hesitancy and stories of true vaccine side effects, those need to be flagged. These are all lists of things that this Virality project, this shadowy ministry of misinformation, these are the types of things they were flagging on Twitter actively all the time. Here's another one. Other true stories that could fuel hesitancy, like celebrity deaths after vaccines, or they said they wanted also false or misleading posts from accounts of well-known offenders like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They actually say pretty much everything he tweets could be flagged, is what they said in this Virality project. They also said vaccine passport narratives should be flagged, saying concerns over such programs have driven a larger anti-vaccination narrative about the loss of rights and freedom. So, we want to address that vaccine passport narrative because that's whatever. I mean, this is just amazing that they want to censor Americans that are actually bringing up true concerns that ended up being, by the way, accurate and came to pass. A lot of these actually came to pass. They also wanted to flag true stories of blood clots from AstraZeneca vaccines to a New York Times story about vaccine recipients who contracted a blood disorder. Those were things they were flagging. These were all true things. They said also, even if the post was deemed fine, if the comments under it could be construed as anti-vax, they wanted to flag those posts too. So if you say something, anything, and then people started to go into the comments and started saying anything that was considered anti-vax, they wanted those posts flagged as well. So now you're responsible for the comments that people make under your tweets. They said that they wanted to censor any talk about the increasingly popular narrative of natural immunity. I think we have that tweet. That was number 23. They censor any talk about increasingly popular narrative of natural immunity. They also said in tweet 24, they said media should emphasize the rarity of breakthrough infections. So when people were vaccinated and they still started getting sick, they said, what we want are the emphasizing of tweets that go around saying that these are rare. And we saw this, right? When we were all on Twitter, we could see the same thing. It was like just the same. It was almost like they copied and pasted the language from each other, and it would be the same tweet. And we saw this even with other things like, rare breakthrough infection, rare side of, everything. It just seemed like they were copying and pasting, and this is why. The Virality Project was saying amplify the ones that are saying that it's rare. They also said that after the CDC changed how breakthrough infections would be reported to only the vaccinated who were hospitalized or who died. So the CDC changed it because it turns out breakthrough infections weren't so rare. Then the Virality Project said, well, anybody who criticizes the CDC changing the definition of breakthrough cases to only those who are vaccinated who end up hospitalized or died, then we want you to flag those comments because those are anti-vaccine activists that claim that the updated policy is intended to exaggerate vaccine efficacy by deflating the case numbers. And we wouldn't want that, would we? The Virality Project flagged another fact that needed to be censored, the fact that the COVID-19 vaccine was the first mRNA. They said this fact was leading to hesitancy, claiming the vaccine is untested, so they wanted that flagged. They also wanted discussion about Fauci's emails flagged because discussions surrounding his legally obtained emails undermined his authority, they said. Well, Matt Taibbi joins us. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Kim.
So what were your main takeaways from this particular round of the Twitter files? I know there have been so many, but in this one, what was your big takeaway from it?
Well, this, first of all, it came about just because just before I testified to the House, one of our researchers, we have a whole team kind of looking through this stuff now, found a string of emails related to this thing called the Virality Project. And the two big things about this are that they built a cross-platform JIRA ticketing system. So it's a unified, basically, clearinghouse for censorship between all the different platforms. That I think was very significant. And then there was also the fact that they, in their instructions to Twitter, openly said that we would like you to classify as standard misinformation on your platform true stories that may promote hesitancy. They actually said that out loud in a couple of places, which we thought was really remarkable because they're normally much more careful about their language.
Right. And this time they're saying, yeah, we know it's true, but we're still going to classify it. And what I found interesting was that they use the term malinformation. So we know misinformation and disinformation, but then they're saying malinformation. So it's true information, but it maybe would lead to bad outcomes. Is that what they were meaning by that?
Yeah, malinformation is just a euphemism that means true but somehow politically inconvenient. We've run up against this a little bit more frequently, I think, as time has progressed, because when this whole thing started in 2017, in earnest, I would say, obviously it goes back before that, but they really began with openly talking about disinformation and Russian lies, Russian fake news. They progressed over time to aiming more at domestic audiences, and then they moved from disinformation to this concept of malinformation, which is based on the idea that people cannot handle controversies or difficult facts. They can't work them out on their own. They need authoritative figures to tell them what they should understand. And malinformation is just anything that could lead a person to have a bad thought. Like, for instance, that you might be hesitant about the vaccine.
One thing that I don't know if you uncovered this or if there was any sort of indication, but why would this project, why would Stanford and all the organizations that were involved in this project, what was their motivation for taking the time, the resources, the money to go and set this up? And then, ping Twitter all the time with, hey, this is malinformation or disinformation. We want you to kind of look into this. I mean, Twitter, when you look at it from a company's perspective, they have no real motivation to dedicate resources, employees to this, to going around and looking through their platform. Clearly, the government must have made them leery, right? Made them feel like you have to do this. I don't know if maybe there's another motivation why Twitter would do this other than just feeling coerced by the government. But and I think we've talked about that and we've seen that. But for these organizations like Stanford and this Virality project, what was their motivation? I mean, were they getting paid by the government to do this? Who was saying to them, go and set this up and go and censor Twitter?
That's still a little bit of a mystery, like who is taking orders from whom in this situation. If you look at the funding behind their partners, so they have sort of these core four partners that includes a company called Graphica, which is funded heavily by the Department of Defense. Another one is the University of Washington, which has a very big National Science Foundation grant. Both of those appear to be directed towards working with other universities on disinformation projects. So it has the look and feel of a partnership that was publicly funded with this sort of project in mind. Now, if you go back, the predecessor project to the Virality project was the Election Integrity Partnership, where they talked openly about how this was something that they were going to do in place of the DHS and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a sub-agency of DHS, because they needed to fill the gaps legally for the DHS. So my theory on this, and it's only based on some circumstantial stuff like the fact that they were using the same infrastructure as that other partnership, but that this was the dry run for the Disinformation Governance Board. One of their final recommendations was to create what they called the Center of Excellence at the DHS. And the infrastructure is very similar to what you would want if you were going to create that kind of a body. By the way, in terms of the motivation for the companies, there is an obvious one, which is that the Stanford was basically doing a lot of the flagging that the company would otherwise have to do itself. So a lot they were actually taking some work off the hands of Twitter, as opposed to what the FBI normally did, which was just give them a lot of work by handing them stuff that needed to be looked through again.
So are you saying they actually gave access to the platform to this project and let them actually go in themselves? And what were they doing then? Were they flagging tweets? Were they removing tweets? What were they doing?
They were flagging. My understanding is that they were flagging. So when Twitter onboarded to the Jira system, we know they had a capability of taking in upwards of 50 million tweets a day. So they were absorbing an enormous number of tweets. We don't know how they were separating out specifically COVID-related tweets. That's something we're hoping to find out in subsequent searches. But that was the idea, was that all of these different platforms were basically mass uploading COVID-related content, and the Stanford project was going in and analyzing all of this stuff in total. So you may be looking at a bit of some information that came from Facebook and some from Twitter and some from TikTok, and they would give you a report that was global in nature, which was also something that I think Twitter liked about this.
Yeah, so I guess that leads us to the two questions then is, again, what is the motivation of this company, of this project, I should say? I mean, was there a profit behind it? It just seems so odd that this project would suddenly take this up. Like, oh, yeah, we're going to go and we're going to take resources to flag Twitter. I mean, there had to have been a reasoning behind that, whether it be maybe a profit motive or some sort of political motive, right? There's got to be something there. And then the other question would be, okay, so even if they did take the resources off of Twitter, I understand that, but why was Twitter even feeling the need, like they needed to do that anyway, that they needed to go around flagging tweets or that they needed to go around censoring people using their platform? Like, what was their feeling of, oh, we have to do this?
So on the first question on the motivation, I think one of the things that we're coming to understand about all of this is that this anti-disinformation sort of network that's being built with all of these huge think tanks and traditionally non-governmental organizations that are now being funded by the government, everything from Stanford to the University of Washington's CIP program to Memphis, their digital forensics, their media forensics lab, the Shorenstein Center at Harvard, digital forensics research lab at the Atlantic Council. This is like the next military contracting gold rush. This is the big thing that is seizing Washington right now. The tap is running dry on counterterrorism. So there's an enormous amount of money that has to be appropriated unless they come up with a new mission. And this is it. This idea of sort of, you might remember the old conspiracy theories about total information awareness in the early days of the Iraq War. Well, it's now kind of coming true. Like, this is a lot of companies and academic organizations and think tanks are positioning themselves to become recipients of huge amounts of money that are going to come from the government and go somewhere, whether it comes from the State Department or the Pentagon or whatever. And so that's one motivation. Like, so it's Stanford, it had done the EIP, it had money for that. It needed to come up with a new rationale to get more money. And everybody is out for that next huge contract. So I think that's one thing. For Twitter's perspective, I think all these companies, there's a mix of ideological simpatico among the kind of content moderation teams, the trust and safety teams at all these companies. They had already been developing this idea that they needed to be more in connection with each other, leading up to 2020 and COVID. Before the election in 2020, they had already created these working groups with government. So there was already this coordination that was happening. I think that they are in a space where they want to be doing information sharing and they want to be doing this in an organized way. Why is still a little bit of a mystery to me, but there aren't that many civil libertarians running these companies anymore. So that's one explanation.
Yeah, what did you call this? You call the disinform. It's like the military-industrial complex, but this is obviously with a different.
Yeah, the
What is it?
censorship industrial complex. It's actually Michael Schellenberger's term, the censorship industrial complex. But I think it's a very apt comparison because we initially came into this thinking that it was probably going to be a small story about the FBI or the DHS occasionally calling about this or that issue to these platforms, and it turns out to be this sprawling hydra of money and requests that's coming from all directions. And it's not just coming from the government, it's coming from these foundations and think tanks and academic institutions that are incidentally also funded by the government in many cases. So it's a big thing. It's very much like what Eisenhower was describing in the early days of the military-industrial complex. This is becoming more powerful than we had previously understood.
And extremely dangerous that it's going to be used against, we the American people. The military-industrial complex is already extremely dangerous. We Americans often don't really, we don't bear the brunt of that a lot of the times because now with droning and now with using other civilian populations as the actual people that have to go and fight the wars, we're not seeing the bodies come home as much. So it's easier for, I think, Americans to sort of turn a blind eye to the war machine that has happened, that is raging around the world. But with this, it's interesting because it is really being used against us. But what also, it seems that half of America is okay with it. I mean, you've been experiencing this where even when you were testifying, they were calling you a so-called journalist for exposing this. We're seeing more people calling for this censorship, thinking that this is a good thing, that we must do this. It's like the people that say, no, we must go to war. We must go and massacre hundreds of thousands of people in faraway lands. Do you feel like, since you've been exposing all this, that there's been any sort of shift at all in the thinking of some people? Are you getting some people who are saying, you know what, Matt, wow, you've exposed something and you've changed my mind?
I do. I mean, first of all, I think it was a little bit of an illusion that there wasn't public outrage about this, and that was largely a function of the fact that there's a very select group of people who all work in the commercial media who made a conscious decision to not cover these stories. But the average person, most of them on the left and the right, have, I think, the same feelings about this. They don't want to be surveilled. They don't want the government recording information about their conversations. And they certainly don't want to be told what to say and what not to say, especially if what they're saying is true. The COVID story, I think, hit people in a particular way because you had people whose family members were affected by this, who maybe they had adverse reactions to the shot. And for the first time, I mean, I'm one of these people who just sort of without hesitation took the vaccine because I grew up trusting vaccines. It was one of those things that I never wondered about. But the way they handled the messaging in this makes me distrust authority in kind of a new way. And I think that's a common reaction now with people on both sides of the aisle. They working in media, trust is a two-way street. I think you know this, Kim. Like, your audiences won't trust you if you don't trust them. And this whole idea that we have to hold things back from you because we think you're too dumb to handle it is a massive violation of trust by government authorities. And I think people, I think they are waking up to it. I've heard more reporters also in the last couple of weeks kind of calling me on the sly about this, like, that they're interested now for the first time. So I do think things are changing a little.
Since when you and Michael Schellenberger went and testified, is there any sort of update on that? Is there anything that's going to be done with the information that has been discovered?
I don't know. We were hoping that by publishing this new stuff about the Virality project, that maybe there would be some kind of effort to try to, get into what actually happened in that centralized JIRA system. I think if somebody were to take an interest in an investigative way into, maybe some kind of antitrust situation, that would be a good place to look. If you were looking for First Amendment violations, that I would guess they would be there too. That would be a place you might want to at least check. But we don't know yet. We're still at the stage where we're just presenting this information and trying to get people interested in it.
Is Twitter worried? I mean, is Elon Musk worried that Twitter would be sued? I mean, one of the first thoughts when you see all of these things is a lot of people could start suing Twitter, saying you were censoring me, silencing me for no real reason. Is he worried about that? Or even better, maybe he should be the one to actually level the lawsuit against the U.S. government, saying you censored my company. I now own it. It wasn't happening when I was running, but now it's my company. You were censoring my company. You were infringing on our First Amendment rights and going after them. Is there any discussion about that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't talk to Elon all that much. We're both in a very uncomfortable situation. I mean, I can't say anything, about him really that's positive publicly, because that will be taken in a certain way. So I'm basically opting not to say anything at all. And any communications that we might have also would be loaded in a certain way, because they could be taken as him directing me to do something that would be unethical, maybe. And so it's mostly been awkward. I mean, I think he, the one thing I will say is I think he came to this project with a genuine sense of trying to restore some credibility to the platform. I still think that's his goal. And one of the reasons why I don't think that I'm being manipulated with this material is that I do have a level of trust in his judgment about this. So, I don't know how he feels about it, but if I had to guess, I think he feels the way that most people feel about this.
Yeah, you have been accused of cherry picking information.
Mm-hmm.
These Twitter files are fairly short. I mean, in fairness, I suppose we're only getting screenshots of paragraphs. We're only getting little snippets of information. The threads are maybe only 40 tweets long. So I guess, what do you say to the accusation that you're cherry picking information to make to make somehow this look worse than it is?
Well, there wouldn't be a whole lot of context that you could add to make this look less worse. I mean, that's one of the things I've been trying to do with all these stories is, obviously every news story is cherry picked. You're always taking, from the subset of all information on earth, you're always picking the 5 or 6 facts that you need for a news story and you're putting them in there. What's different about this is that you're starting with an artificially narrowed set of information to begin with. What I would say is we've been trying to pursue a strategy from the start of only picking news stories that by themselves are newsworthy. So even if somebody added some other kind of context later, it would still be a news story. For instance, if the Digital Forensic Research Lab of the Atlantic Council sent Twitter a list of 40,000 names that they thought were related to Iranian, foreign malign influence operations. No matter what other context you add to that, that is what it is. And that's, I think, similar to what the Virality Project story is. Like, when they say we would like you to consider true information as misinformation, maybe there's another email that says we were kidding about that, but I haven't found it. I mean, I understand that criticism, but the reason most of what we're looking at is just, it's interesting, but kind of not newsworthy in a traditional way. It's like the business, doing its thing. But every now and then we come across something that is clearly in the public interest, and we try to just hone in on that and make that as narrow as we can so that people can digest it. And then hopefully we'll expand out at some point.
Yeah, the criticism is a bit silly when you think about it. It's like digging through 30,000 emails in someone's account and saying, Oh, well, you only found one that incriminated them for a crime, but all the others were
Right.
fine. The other
Right. Yeah.
29,999 were fine,
Which is,
so,
I mean, and I'm sure you know lots of lawyers, Kim. I mean, like they will tell you the same thing. If you do any litigation, you're going to look through 10 million documents, and the
yeah,
whole point is to find the three that matter that you can go to
right.
trial with. And that's kind of, this is very similar to that kind of work. It's like the litigation for a big lawsuit, and you're looking for stuff that connects to other things that you're going to make an argument about, and it's just a
Yeah.
normal process. The fact that people are making a big deal of it is weird.
And really just the implications, I think, of this entire exposure. The one that you mentioned, like the censorship information complex, which is similar to the military industrial complex, which, I think there needs to be a greater conversation in American society about what should we be contracting out to private entities. Personally, I cannot believe that we have these sort of mercenaries, like hired military that is outside of the scope of the U.S. military, that can go and actually fight wars for us. That to me just seems like that shouldn't even be allowed. That should be illegal. Same thing for this sort of where the government can contract out entities to do its dirty work. I think we need to have a larger conversation in society about not just these two things, but many aspects of the government doing that. And then the other thing that this should be raising is the conversation about what should be censored, if anything. Should there be a level of censorship that is okay in these platforms? What should that censorship be? Who then guides that censorship? And what we're seeing is just this hot mess of regular people, truth information being censored. So these could open up larger conversations, but it's interesting that instead people are just shutting it down, saying, smearing you for exposing it, and just choosing to ignore this ginormous elephant in the room. That to me seems to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing that's horrifying to me personally is there was a particularly telling graphic in the election integrity partnership. One of their videos, they showed like the four major stakeholders that they were talking to in this presentation, and it was government, NGOs, tech companies, and media. And they showed the sort of arrows going back and forth between all these groups, as if they were all working together. Reports going to and from the media. So like the media would be reporting things to Facebook and Twitter and so on and on. The problem with that is that all these groups, especially the NGOs and the press, are supposed to have an adversarial relationship with the other groups. Like the whole point of having an NGO, and especially the news media, like this is the part that really bothers me. We cannot be partners with any of these groups. Like we have to be on our own. Otherwise, we have no function in society. The function is inherently deceptive if we're working with these groups that we're supposed to be, checking on. So that this all speaks to a kind of a breakdown. These larger issues that you were talking about, what should be censored, what shouldn't be censored, they're legitimate questions. It's hard. The internet is difficult. There's crazy stuff on there. There's horrible pornography, violence. Like there has to be some kind of way that we work this out. But what you can't have is a unified information control system with no independent check on that authority, because that's just way too much power for any one group of people to have. And it's really been depressing to watch, in particular, the media surrender its authority in this moment, because we're the last line of defense. And if we give up, there's nothing left after us. That's the problem that I worry about.
Well, good for you for doing actual, real journalism, not the so-called stuff, but actually bringing this to light and calling out the powers that be on this. This is really, really important. for us to be, like you said, questioning everything, questioning all of them, their motivations, every last one of them, the people in positions of power. That is the job of the media. And you're doing it. So, real journalist, Matt Taibbi, thank you for joining the show.
Thanks so much, Kim. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Well, guys, as the world is seemingly collapsing around us, it's a good time to think about investing in gold, diversifying your portfolio, because who knows what's going on with the banks and who knows what's going on with the dollar. And so if you don't want to bank your entire retirement on it, you might want to diversify. And now is a really great time to do that because Birch Gold is running a special, and that special is if you do a qualifying purchase between now and the end of the month, that's March 31st, they will send you a free safe directly to your door where you can store your precious metals. If you decide to get some gold or silver or palladium and you want to store it in your house, then you could do that in your safe that they will send to you on those qualifying purchases. Or if you would like to convert your IRA or your 401k into an IRA in precious metals, then a specialist can help walk you through that process. All you've got to do is go to birchgold.com/Kim to get the process going in diversifying your portfolio so that you don't have all your eggs in one basket. So go to birchgold.com/Kim, get that free info kit, plus a specialist will walk you through the process. A specialist will contact you and go over what is best for your situation and how you can diversify. I got to tell you, I've got so many people since I've been talking about Birch Gold asking me, I really, I never really thought about this before, but now I'm thinking about doing it. People that are just friends of mine in my life. And I want to hear from you if you have done this, if you've started investing into precious metals. Email me. I'm just curious about your experience, Kim@KimIversen.com.